Good morning, everyone, and we're delighted to have Ian Proudfoot, who's the Global Head of Ag Food with KPMG, with us to provide a scene setter for this conference, which is focused on the future of the food and beverage industry and the people who are providing capital and investment for the growth of that industry over the next 5-10 years and more. So, Ian, you're very welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Joe.
So I'd like to start by asking you about the overall volume of demand for food and beverages across the world over the next decade and more. What's driving that? How will it correlate with population growth and GDP expansion? And how should investors think about the opportunities within that?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I'd like to say is I'm not convinced any longer that we'll see the population grow to the sort of 10 billion people that's been talked about by the end of the century. I think, for me, I think the pandemic's changed how people are thinking about their populations and how people are thinking about the world in front of them. I think also we're becoming much more aware of the climate crisis that we're facing. And I think as a consequence, so people who could be parents are making different decisions around either how many children they have or whether they have children at all. So I think we will still continue to see a growth in our population, but I don't think we're going to get anywhere close to that 10 billion. So that's good news, because that means, it will make it easier to feed the world within the resource capabilities we have. But the challenge will be we still need more food. And, when we look to history, the overall sort of conclusion that we see is that as the population grows and as wealth grows, the demand for food grows. And, I don't think anything's going to fundamentally change that causation. So as the world gets richer and as GDP improves, we get more people being lifted out of poverty. They're going to be looking for different types of food. They're not going to be wanting food that provides base sustenance. They're going to be looking for food that provides experience, that provides nutrition, that provides something more. And as a consequence, we're going to have to change the mix of what we produce. But there's two buts that I'd like to put into that. And the first is that, we actually, as a world, and particularly in the developed world, we eat far more food than we need to eat. So in reality, those of us living in the West, many of us are eating up to twice the amount of protein that we need and a whole heap of other nutrients that we really don't need to be eating. And that's causing fundamental health problems to society. We see it in the obesity rates, we see it in diabetes, we see it in heart disease, all those fundamental challenges. And secondly, we have food systems now that are putting real pressure on planetary boundaries. So, there isn't the ability as there was 50 years ago to, enter into a new green revolution and see, wire up and improve our productivity and enhance our yields, and all of those big step gains we made over the last century, they're not there for us now. So where we can get benefits, they're going to be much, much smaller benefits. So for me, the logical conclusion when I look at a food system in front of us today is that we're going to have more food, but food is going to get more expensive and food is going to have to be produced in different ways. So as I look at it, that's a challenge in front of us. However, particularly in the West, we look at this overall view that food must be cheap. It's become the unassailable fact of retail. And I just don't see the economics working for continuation of cheap food that we've seen in the past. So, and actually fundamentally see that cheap food is a problem because it's encouraging some of the health problems that we have in society. So I think we will see a world that can continue to feed itself and will get better at feeding itself. So we won't continue to be leaving 830 million odd people hungry every single day. The regulatory response won't allow that to happen. So we're going to be focusing on feeding every person. We're going to be thinking a lot more about the role that food plays in the healthcare system. Food will become a prescription, a preventative tool that we can use to achieve better health outcomes for society. The food production systems will change. We will get better at managing food waste. So overall, although the population will grow, I don't think we're going to see nearly as big a growth in our total food supply as we will see in the population numbers. So I think the food system is going to become about doing things better and in a much more targeted way than it has been for the last 50 to 70 years.
And what does that all mean for sustainable food production systems and how people invest in those systems? And secondly, maybe related to that, what does it mean for sources of protein between animal and plant, for example, at a very broad level?
Two really good questions. Maybe take the first one first in terms of, what does a sustainable food system look like? I'm sitting here in New Zealand today in Auckland, and already this year we've had 2 flooding events and a cyclone. And I think that's causing us here in New Zealand, and I think it's as other people around the world are experiencing these extreme climatic events, to really start to think around what does resilient food systems look like. And I think the conclusion we're starting to reach and reach quite quickly is the way that we've done things historically has aligned with the environmental conditions we've worked in up to now. But the environment is changing, the climate is changing, and to be resilient in agriculture in the future, the biggest question is, why do we still continue to do things outdoors? And I think, for countries like Ireland, for countries like New Zealand, that's a really confronting question, because we've built businesses and built great success on free range, open air agriculture. But the reality is, I think we need to start to think about things differently. So there is a lot of talk globally about the theme of regenerative agriculture. And I still struggle to get my mind around precisely what's meant by regenerative. I try to sum it up as, it's doing things better every day than we did yesterday, always trying to make sure we're enhancing and giving back to our natural systems. But I think actually the more important conversation that we need to have quite quickly is, how do we move ourselves towards climate resilient agricultural systems? Because they will ultimately be the long-term sustainable systems that will work for us. So that means, we can't continue just to focus on the mitigation measures we've been talking about today. But actually, we've got to think about how we use our land, and is it time to start to do things in different places or using different systems to actually make them work? And, that means the housed or controlled environments become part of the conversation in a much greater way than maybe they've been historically, as well as, things that you've alluded to in your second part of the question, in terms of things like investments into fermented and cultured production systems, those alternative protein systems that, enable us to do things in a very different way, in a very much more aligned to the market opportunity. A couple of points for me, though, I think standing out in terms of what a sustainable system is going to look like moving forward. Firstly, I think we need to get our minds around the fact that we grow a whole mass of biomass and bioproduct every time we're growing food or we're producing something for a beverage. The wine industry is a great example of that. We crush the grapes and we've got a ton of grape marc, as well as everything that comes from the vines in terms of an annual year's production cycle. We use only a fraction of what we grow. And the reality is, I think for sustainable production systems, we have to think much more inclusively about how we use 100% of what we grow. And I think as an investment conference, that is one of the biggest investment opportunities in the sector today. How do you utilize all the byproduct, all the biomass to actually create value and potentially create more nutrition for society? Second part of that, I think, is really important. I think we need to really start now to think beyond our traditional production systems and challenge us about where we are going to be able to grow and what that growing system is going to look like. The one I always get excited about, and the reality for me, I think, is again a massive opportunity in Ireland, is what's going to be available to us in the blue economy. How can we use the ocean to grow food? How can we use the ocean sustainably, not just to grow food, but to help us address our sustainability challenges, to help us sequester carbon, to help us create a holistic energy system as well. So when I look at it, I think a sustainable food system is fundamentally also going to be connected to ensuring that the planet is more sustainable in a much broader way than the food systems thought about that before. Maybe if I just jump into the question about animal-based proteins and the questions there. For me, when I've been talking to my traditional food production clients, people that are producing red meat and dairy, it's been a really easy conversation. I've just talked to them about the fact that this is another competitor. And many of them have been dealing with new competitors for a long time. If you take the red meat sector, there's been the emergence of the poultry sector over the last 20 years or so, which has been a significant new competitor and created substitution of products. But, what does that mean? Well, it means in some cases that as you get a new competitor bringing new products into the market, some customers are going to want to go and buy those products, and that happens. And in some cases, the products are bringing new attributes, or they're bringing different attributes, whether they're plant-based or cultured or fermented, and that's attractive for a particular element that's important to a particular consumer. And I think one area that's really clear is around health claims, and many of these new products are making claims about the benefits they have for individuals' health. And I think the response to that has got to be really doubling down on understanding what are the health benefits of the traditional food we've produced and making sure that they're really clear and really understood by consumers. I don't think we've done a great job of describing the nutritional complexity in many of our traditional proteins. But equally, so these new products are going to create new customers and bring new people into the sector. We saw a great story the other week of one of my clients that's involved in a zero carbon beef product, and they took it to a youth event and displayed it and told the story about it. And a committed vegetarian that hadn't eaten a steak for 20 years ate the product and stood up and said, "I will now eat beef if I'm eating this product, because the reason I wasn't eating beef was that I perceived it to be bad for the climate, but a zero carbon beef product positions and meets my need, and it gives me the experience I've always enjoyed when I was a kid." So, it's opened up potential for new customers by attracting them to a particular attribute. So I look at the markets as they're evolving for these alternative products, and I go, there's pros and there's cons, but what I see in front of me is just a world of opportunity, because the great thing is consumers are becoming more connected to the food they eat. They're becoming more connected to the attributes of that food, and they're thinking more deeply about the buying choices they make. And that gives me, as a producer or as a marketer, the opportunity to tell my story to that consumer and attract them to my product. But, it will be naive to think there won't be some substitution. But I think the risk of substitution falls on those people that are not able to articulate a sustainable story, that haven't thought about innovation, that haven't thought about how they package the attributes of their customers, invest in telling those attribute stories. And therefore, I think, as I look at it, producers that are focused on doing the right thing, telling their story effectively, building strong connections with their customers and their markets, they will be in the best place possible to be able to respond to the opportunity the new markets are creating for us.
You're touching on some really powerful insights there that are very valuable. But can I ask you, as a last question, to talk as well about the beverage industry, and within that, the entire phenomenon of non-alcoholic beverage versus traditional product, and how that kind of plays into the whole area of health and sustainability as well?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and one that it really got me thinking about it. Actually, when I got the questions through, I went and looked on the Guinness website, and I think I counted 16 different versions of Guinness now available, and that just shows how any beverage manufacturer these days isn't operating in a single sector, but they're operating in a fashion market, and that means you've got to have a portfolio of products, and a portfolio of products that matches people's lifestyles. And some of them will be alcoholic and some of them will not be alcoholic, but it's about how do you tell the branded story and keep that brand fresh with new and innovative products all the time. So, for me, I look at, say, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, which has been amazingly successful globally, but it's one wine, it's produced in one way, sold from one region. And champagne has been the same. The champagne has been there for centuries and has created this position or this perception of, it is the number one product people aspire to in the sector. But other products will come and other products will go. And my biggest concern about this $2 billion industry that we've built with Sauvignon Blanc is it goes out of fashion, and then people just move on. So for me now, I think, to be relevant, you've got to be thinking about how you evolve the products and how you offer both alcoholic and non-alcoholic varieties. You've got to think about how you respond to changes in demand and changes in fashion. And, I think that's about lighter wines. It's about wines where people can have a glass and still drive and not be concerned about being stopped by the police. It's about how you fit into people's lifestyle aspirations. I was unfortunate. I had a heart attack 5 or 6 years ago. And one of the things that really sticks in my memory from my post-cardiac rehabilitation is that 1 glass of wine is equivalent of 5 slices of bread. And then when it was put into those terms, it changed my drinking habits entirely. That was for certain. So, in the end, I think the key for people in the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic beverage sector is what's the experience you're giving. How are you innovating with the product? How are you getting the product to the consumer? What new channels are you bringing it through? How are you making it interesting in a way of selling it to them and serving it to them? And all those sort of things become really important. So ultimately, which influence have you connected to it? What's the price point you want for that product? What image does it therefore create in people's minds? And I look at it, and the regulatory hurdles are lower for non-alcoholic beverages than they are for alcoholic very often. Therefore, I think we will see most companies moving forward thinking along a dual strategy, and how do I make my brand talk to the consumers as opposed to whether I'm selling them alcoholic beverage or a non-alcoholic beverage. I think we'll see a very different beverage market evolving.
Thanks very much for that, Ian. I'd have preferred if you hadn't shared the story about the glass of wine and then the slices of bread, but outside of that, that's been a fantastic series of insights and observations that I think really tease up the day for us at the conference, and I want to extend the thanks to the audience for you taking the time to give us those. Thanks, Ian.
No problem. It's been a pleasure.